When I opened my eyes that morning, the room was flooded with pale light. The rays of the early sun filtered through the curtains, painting blurry patterns on the wall opposite. I lay still, listening to the sounds of the house. The dishes were already clattering downstairs. Violet was making breakfast. Not for me, of course, for herself and Russell. I was invisible in my own house. Funny how life changes. 40 years I lived here with Agnes. We paid the mortgage, renovated every corner with our own hands, raised a son and a garden outside the window. Now Agnes has been gone for 5 years, and I've become an unwelcome guest in the walls I built. I got out of bed slowly, feeling my joints crunching. 75 is not an insignificant age, though my head is still clear. The doctors say I'm in great shape for my age. If only my son thought so. I got dressed and went downstairs. In the kitchen, Violet was working on some elaborate scrambled eggs, and Russell was sitting at the table, staring at a tablet screen. No one looked up when I walked in. "Good morning," I said, heading for the coffee maker. Violet barely nodded, still stirring something in the pan. Russell mumbled something unintelligible, keeping his eyes on his news. I was used to this kind of reception, but each time it hurt like a new one. "Hugh, I told you not to touch the coffee maker." Violet turned sharply as I reached for the appliance. "You almost broke it last time." "I just wanted to make myself some coffee," I replied, backing away. "The usual." "I'll pour it for you myself," she sighed defiantly. "Sit down and wait, please. And by the way, I took those old magazines out of the living room. They were collecting too much dust." I froze. "My tech magazines? The ones on the bottom shelf?" "Yeah, those are the ones. I put them in the garage." She didn't even turn to me, still working on her breakfast. "That's where they belong, frankly. Who needs those dusty publications from the 50s? "I do. I need them. I've collected them all my life." The chemistry and engineering collection was my pride. There were articles I'd been rereading for decades, marginal notes, memoirs. "Russell," I looked at my son, hoping for encouragement. "You remember this collection, don't you? We used to go through the magazines together when you were little." My son finally pulled away from the tablet and looked at me with slight irritation. "Dad, they're just old magazines. They're taking up space." "Violet's right. They're better off in the garage." "It's my house," I said quietly. "Those magazines have been there for 20 years. Silence. Russell and Violet exchanged the look I'd learned to recognize. "Here we go again." Violet was the first to break the silence. "Hugh, we all live in this house. We all have to consider each other's interests. I'm just trying to keep order." I didn't answer. What was the point? It wasn't the first time I'd had this conversation, and it obviously wouldn't be the last. I sat down at the table at the far end, where my place was now, away from the center of family life. Violet placed a cup in front of me. The coffee was weak, with milk, though she knew I preferred it strong and black. Another little reminder of who was the mistress of the house now. Russell and Violet had moved in with me shortly after Agnes died. "Temporarily," my son said then, "just so you won't be alone until you get the hang of it." Agnes died unexpectedly, a heart attack in her sleep. For me, it was a blow I couldn't recover from for months. I was grateful for the company in those days. I didn't mind when Violet started rearranging the furniture, changing the interior that Agnes and I had created over decades. "You need a change, Hugh," she said. "Too many memories are unhealthy." I was giving in to everything. Perhaps that was my mistake. Step by step, I'd turned into a guest, then an unwanted neighbor, and now a burden. The house I'd built with my own hands no longer belonged to me. "Are you going to your club again tonight?" Violet asked, setting a plate of breakfast in front of Russell. She didn't offer me anything, though the smell of bacon and eggs made me hungry. "It's chess club," I corrected. "And yes, it's Tuesday, our meeting day." "Okay," she nodded, looking like she was doing me a favor. "But be back before 6. We'll have company." "What guests?" I looked at her in surprise. "Russell's co-workers and their wives. There will be a small dinner." That was news to me. They were having dinner at my house without even giving me a heads up. "I could help with the cooking," I suggested. "Agnes always said my steaks were the best in Southfield." Violet smiled, that condescending smile I hated. "You needn't worry, Hugh. I've ordered the catering. Besides, these people are used to a certain level." The blow had hit its target. I wasn't good enough for their guests. Russell got up from the table without even looking at me. I have to go. The meeting's at 8:30. He pecked Violet on the cheek. I'll be there at 6 tonight. He headed for the exit, adjusting his tie as he went. Russell, I called out to him. Did you remember? He turned around with a confused look on his face. About what? Next Wednesday, my birthday, I reminded him. 75 years old. An anniversary. His face changed, a mixture of guilt and annoyance. Right, of course I remember, he smiled strainedly. We have plans, don't worry, it's going to be great. I could see that he remembered only now. Violet threw me an annoyed look behind his back. I'll see you tonight, Russell said and disappeared out the door. We were left alone with Violet. She silently cleared the table, ignoring my presence. I finished my coffee and stood up. I'll help with the dishes, I offered. No need, she cut me off. You'd better do something in your room. My room, not my office, not my workshop, not even my bedroom. Your room, like a child's or a lodger's. I backed away, feeling another humiliation, headed to the garage to find my magazines. They were piled in a cardboard box, some crumpled. I carefully pulled out the top one, ran my hand over the cover. Chemistry and Engineering, the 1952nd issue. I had once been a respected chemical engineer, running a laboratory, holding patents. After retirement, many colleagues continued to consult with me. Now my own sister-in-law spoke to me as if I were an old man out of his mind. I was sitting among my magazines when the phone rang. My old friend Terrence, we'd met at university and had worked in the same company for almost 30 years. Hugh, you old geezer. His bass voice sounded as cheerful as ever. How are you? I'm getting by, I answered, suddenly glad to get the call. And how are you? I'm fine. Field and Darla bought a new boat and are going on an island cruise. They're insisting on inviting me to join them. Can you believe it? At my age, I smiled. Terrence's son and daughter-in-law had always been good to him. You're lucky to have kids, Terry. Sidikurkunum. Yeah, they're good, he agreed. Listen, I'm calling about something important. It's your birthday in 2 weeks, right? 75 is a milestone. I was surprised he remembered. Yeah, next Wednesday. That's great. I thought maybe we could do it the old-fashioned way. We could hang out at Moose Creek. I'll get the old folks together. Alfred, Norman, maybe even Patterson from Chicago. The thought of seeing old friends brought a warmth to my chest. But then I remembered what my son had said about some plans. Russell seemed to be planning something for the day. A family reunion or something. Oh, all right then. Terrence sounded disappointed. Maybe another day then. After my birthday? Let's do that, I agreed. I'll call you back after the party and we'll make arrangements. We talked a little more about old times, health and mutual acquaintances. When I hung up the phone, I felt lighter, as if a breath of fresh air had broken into the stale atmosphere of my life. The rest of the day went as usual. I went to the chess club, where I was still respected. There I could be myself, Hugh Bramble, a man of opinion and experience, not just an old man tolerated out of grace. After the club, I deliberately stayed late, walking in the park, so that I could get home by 6 o'clock, as commanded. When I crossed the threshold, there were already voices in the house. The door was opened by Violet, dressed in an evening gown. Ah, there you are, she said with a strained smile. Come in, but please don't disturb us. We have important guests. I silently walked past her. In the living room sat 3 middle-aged couples, Russell's co-workers and their wives. My son was talking animatedly, waving his wine glass. When he saw me, he hesitated for a moment. Ah, Papa, he exclaimed with exaggerated joy. This is my father, Hugh Bramble. The guests greeted me politely, but I could see in their eyes that they did not understand what I was doing at this dinner. Russell apparently hadn't mentioned living in my house. Perhaps they thought the house belonged to him. Sit down, Hugh. Violet pointed to a chair in the corner, not at the communal table, but a little to the side. I'll get you a plate in a moment. I sat down feeling like an extra at this celebration of life. One of the guests, a full man with balding hair, tried to be kind. Mr. Bramble, Russell said you were a chemist? A chemical engineer, I corrected him. I worked at Southfield Chemicals for 42 years. Oh, interesting. He nodded with polite interest. What exactly did you do? I opened my mouth to reply, but Violet deftly cut in. Oh, that was a long time ago. The chemical industry was very different then. Wasn't it, Hugh? She placed a plate of food in front of me. Try this appetizer, Mr. Hanson. It's made to a special recipe. The conversation moved on to another subject, and I remained seated with my plate as if I were not here. Soon the guests forgot I existed at all. I listened to them talk about careers, houses in upscale neighborhoods, and schools for their children, realizing how far my own son's life was from me now. When dinner was in full swing, I quietly got up and carried my plate into the kitchen. Then I went up to my room without anyone noticing. Behind the closed door, I sat in a chair by the window, looking out at the dark garden. In the darkness, I could make out the old apple tree that Agnes and I had planted the year Russell was born. My home, my life, my family. All of this was slowly slipping away from me, becoming an empty shell of memories. I took a picture of Agnes from the bedside table. She smiled from it as only she could, openly and warmly. "What would you do in my place, darling?" I whispered, running my finger over the glass. There was no answer, of course, but something stirred inside me, a quiet but insistent feeling that it couldn't go on like this, that it was time for something to change. From downstairs, I could hear the laughter of the guests and Violet's voice talking excitedly. I knew that in the morning it would be the same silent breakfast, the same condescending glances, the same petty humiliations. Unless I changed the rules of the game. My birthday was 3 days away, but no one at home mentioned it. I noticed the whispering between Russell and Violet, sometimes silent when I entered the room, but I didn't pay much attention to it. Perhaps they were preparing some sort of surprise. Although, to be honest, I didn't really believe in good surprises from them anymore. Sunday morning, I went down to the kitchen earlier than usual. The house was silent, only the ticking of the old floor clock in the living room breaking the stillness. I put the kettle on and took out my favorite mug, a gift from Agnes for our 30th wedding anniversary. Violet hadn't put it away in the garage yet, though I feared that day was not far off. With a mug of freshly brewed tea, I settled on the veranda, looking out at my garden. It too had changed. The ornamental rose bushes that Agnes had planted so lovingly, Violet had replaced with some fancy evergreens I didn't even know the name of. "They require no maintenance and look neat all year round," she explained then, as if caring for roses was a problem, not a pleasure. Voices came from the open dining room window. Russell and Violet had come down for breakfast and were apparently unaware of my presence on the veranda. "We should settle this after his birthday," Violet's voice was insistent. "I found the perfect place, only 20 minutes from here, the Sunny Harbor private retreat." I froze, listening. "I don't know, Vi." Russell's voice sounded uncertain. "Dad's very attached to this house. You know he and Mom built it practically with their own hands." "Russell, be realistic." Violet's voice had a steely edge to it that I knew well. "Your father can't keep this house anymore. His pension is barely enough to pay for utilities and medicine. If it weren't for our help, he'd have been sitting in the dark and cold a long time ago." I almost choked on my tea. What kind of help were we talking about? I paid all the bills from my pension, which, by the way, was quite decent after 42 years of work in a large company. Yes, I lived frugally, but not for lack of money, but out of habit and common sense. "Sonny, Vi, he's my father." Russell's voice sounded weary, as if this wasn't the first time we'd had this conversation. "I can't just send him to a nursing home." "It's not a nursing home. It's a nursing home," Violet corrected. "There are nurses, regular exercise, socialization. He'll be better off with his peers than with us. Besides, think of Christopher and Melanie. They were my grandchildren who went to college and rarely came home." "What to think of them?" Russell was clearly confused. "They're going to need financial support soon. Chris is planning to go to graduate school, and Melanie has been talking about medical school. If the house went to us, we could take out a loan against it, or even sell it and buy something smaller and use the difference for the kids." My heart sank. They weren't just trying to evict me from my own home. They were already planning how they would dispose of it after I left. I set the cup down quietly on the table, afraid my trembling hands might give away my presence. "But the house is still my father's," Russell pointed out. "He must agree to the sale." "Of course," her voice turned honeyed. "That is why we must gently explain to him that it is in his own interest. Hugh can no longer cope with the stairs, the garden, all this space. At Sunny Harbor, everything will be at his fingertips, and he'll be taken care of by professionals. I don't know. Russell was still hesitating. Listen, Violet was clearly losing patience. Your father is a penniless old man who can barely make ends meet. He's practically living on our support. Sooner or later, he's going to have to move to a place with care. It's inevitable. So why not do it now while his mind is still clear enough to adapt? In a couple years, it might be too late. I felt the blood rush to my face. A beggarly old man? On their welfare? This woman lived in my house, used my money, and yet had the nerve to call me a beggar. All right, Russell finally gave in. We'll talk to him after his birthday, but I want it to be his decision. No pressure. Of course, darling, Violet murmured. I'll make all the arrangements. By the way, I've ordered a cake for Wednesday. It's going to be a great party, you'll see. Their voices grew quieter. They'd obviously moved into the kitchen. I remained seated, stunned by what I'd heard. Tears welled up in my eyes, not sadness, but anger and humiliation. How could they think that of me? How could my own son allow his wife to say such things about his father? I got up quietly and walked around the house, entering through the side door. I needed to be alone, to think about all of this. In my room, I closed the door and sat on the edge of my bed, trying to calm the trembling in my hands. My first impulse was to go downstairs immediately and tell them everything I thought about their plans. But what good would that do? Violet would just restate her arguments in a more caring way, and Russell would crumple awkwardly, avoiding my eyes. Nothing would change. I was old and wise enough to realize that. My gaze fell on Agnes's picture on the nightstand. What would you do, dear? I asked mentally again, and this time I could almost hear the answer. Agnes never let herself sit on my neck. Behind her soft smile there was a steely temper. I picked up the phone and dialed Terrence's number. After the third ring, he picked up. Terry, it's Hugh. Remember we talked about meeting after my birthday? There's been a change of plans. I need your help. Right now. An hour later, Terrence and I were sitting in a small cafe 2 blocks from my house. I'd chosen that place deliberately. I was sure I wouldn't run into Russell or Violet, who thought it was too simple. Damn it, Hugh, Terrence shook his head after hearing my story. I can't believe it. Russell always seemed like such a right guy. He's changed, I sighed, wrapping my hands around the cup of cold coffee. Or maybe I just hadn't noticed it before. Agnes had always been a buffer between us. Terrence drummed his fingers thoughtfully on the table. In 50-odd years of friendship, I'd learned all his habits. It was what he did when he was thinking about a difficult problem. What are you going to do? Confront them? What's the use? I shrugged. They'll just deny everything or say I misunderstood, and then they'll be even more careful in their language, but not in their intentions. Then what? Move out on your own before they evict you? I shook my head. This is my house, Terry. I won't let them kick me out of the place where I've lived most of my life. But I can't go on living like this. Every day I feel like I'm losing myself, turning into a shadow. They're destroying not only my life, but also my identity. Terrence nodded understandingly. If you don't leave and confront them, what's left? Change the rules of the game. I felt something like hope for the first time all day. Show them that I'm not the helpless old man they think I am. And how would you do that? I sighed. That's where I need your help. I have an idea, but it's going to take allies. I told him my plan. The more I talked, the more my old friend's eyes lit up. When I was done, he had a big smile on his face. The same smile I remembered from my college days when we'd cook up a prank. It's brilliant, Hugh! He slammed his palm down on the table so that several customers turned in our direction. It's brilliant. And I know the perfect candidates for the role of buyers. Your kids, I looked at him questioningly. Are you sure they'll go for it? Asher, Field and Darla? Terrence laughed. They'll love it. Those two love pranks and shows. Darla was in the theater club in college, you know, and Field, for all his seriousness in business, inherited my sense of humor. I was relaxing a little. The plan was starting to take shape. I feel bad about dragging them into this. Come on, Terrence waved it away. Field still remembered how you helped him with chemistry in his senior year. If it hadn't been for you, he never would have gotten into that prestigious university. And Darla, well, she just loves a good story. This will be an adventure for them. We went over the details. The more we talked, the more realistic our plan seemed. For the first time in a long time, I felt like I was taking control of the situation. We need to meet with them, I concluded. Explain everything in person, make sure they know what to do. I'm on it, Terrence pulled out his cell phone. They don't live that far away in Bloomfield Hills. I'm sure they can get there today. While Terrence talked to his son, I looked out the window of the cafe at the passers-by. Young couples walking with their children, elderly people going about their business, teenagers on skateboards. Ordinary life going on as it happened. I suddenly realized how long it had been since I'd been a part of it, trapped inside the four walls of my room, avoiding confrontations with Violet and my son's condescending indifference. They'll be here in an hour, Terrence announced, ending the call. They suggest we meet at their house. It would be safer, no risk of Russell or Violet accidentally seeing us together. We paid and left the cafe. The day was clear, sunny, but with a slight chill, perfect weather for a walk. But instead we got into Terrence's car and drove to Bloomfield Hills. I could have left a note at home, but I decided not to bother with it. Lately, no one had noticed my absence as long as I went back for dinner. Field and Darla's house turned out to be a spacious colonial-style mansion surrounded by a manicured garden. Looking at it, I wondered how different my life might have been if Russell had followed in Field's footsteps. We were met on the doorstep by a tall man with a strong chin who looked very much like young Terrence, and a graceful woman with lively brown eyes and a lock of red hair. They greeted us with sincere warmth. "Mr. Bramble," Field shook my hand firmly. "It's been so many years. You haven't changed at all." "Call me Hugh, please," I smiled. "And thank you for the compliment, though we both know it's not true. To me, you'll always be the same energetic Mr. Bramble who explained molecular structures to me on the kitchen table." He winked. "Please come in." Darla gestured us in. I prepared tea and snacks. We settled down in the spacious living room. While Darla poured the tea, Terrence briefly outlined the situation. I watched the expression on Field's and Darla's faces, from bewilderment to indignation and then determination. "This is just outrageous." Darla set the cup down with such force that the tea spilled out onto the saucer. "How can they treat you like this in your own home?" "Unfortunately, it happens more often than we realize," Field sighed. "In our society, the elderly are often treated as a burden." "Now that's exactly how they see me," I nodded. "Especially Violet. Russell, he just goes with the flow." "I remember him," Field said thoughtfully. "We didn't know each other very well, but we'd crossed paths at a few family reunions. He always seemed a little hesitant." "He's changed," I repeated what I'd said to Terrence earlier. Or maybe I hadn't noticed it before. "So," Darla stepped forward, her eyes sparkling with enthusiasm. "If I understand correctly, you want us to play the role of buyers of your house? To teach your son and daughter-in-law a lesson?" "That's right," I nodded. "It has to look convincing. They have to believe that the house is really sold, and they'll have to move out." "And you'll stay there as a lodger?" Field clarified. "Yes. Supposedly the new owners will let me live in one of the rooms as a caretaker or something." Field and Darla exchanged glances and then smiled at the same time. "We'll do it," Field said firmly. "On one condition." I tensed. "What's that?" "When it's over, you have to come to dinner and tell us how it ended," Darla winked at me. "We love a good story." I relaxed and laughed. It was a deal. We spent the next hour working out the details of the plan. Field and Darla were to show up at my birthday party as soon as I gave the signal. They would bring money, an envelope stuffed with shredded paper, and act like eccentric rich people who had decided to buy a house on impulse. Terrence will take care of creating fake sales documents that will look convincing enough to the layman. "And what about later?" Terrence asked. "After your birthday?" Field and Darla could drop by casually to look at the house, take measurements, talk to me about the renovation plans, I pondered. It would reinforce the impression to Russell and Violet that the sale is real. "We could even bring in a designer," Darla suggested enthusiastically. "I have a friend who does interiors. She'd be thrilled to be a part of such a venture." "The more details we have, the more convincing our story will be," Field agreed. When the details were finalized, I felt a surge of energy I hadn't felt in a long time. This wasn't just a plan for revenge. It was a way to reclaim my life, my dignity, my identity. "Thank you," I said sincerely, looking at Field and Darla. "I don't know how I can ever thank you for your help." "You don't need anything." Darla gently touched my arm. You know, my grandfather was in a similar situation. My parents took him in, but they didn't treat him very well. Not very well. I was a teenager then, and I couldn't change anything. This was my chance to make things right, even if it was for someone else. I was touched by her words. I was bitter to realize that our story was not unique, that many older people face similar attitudes. Terrence drove me home toward evening. I returned just in time for dinner, and no one even noticed my long absence. Violet barely nodded when I walked into the kitchen, and Russell was too busy with his tablet. There's chicken and rice if you want it. Violet tossed it over her shoulder without looking at me. Thanks. I took the plate and sat down in my corner of the table. As I watched them, the smug Violet and the impassive Russell, I thought about the plan we'd made. In a few days, everything will change. They would know that I wasn't the helpless old man to be written off and sent to Sun Harbor. There wasn't much time left until my birthday. I was looking forward to it with an eagerness I hadn't experienced in years. The morning of my 75th birthday began with the smell of fresh-baked goods wafting from the kitchen. I lay in bed listening to the sounds of the house waking up. Russell and Violet's voices were muffled, but I could hear the notes of excitement. Were they really preparing something special for my anniversary? For a few days after overhearing the conversation about the nursing home, I tried to act normal, so as not to arouse suspicion. I caught occasional glances from Violet, as if she were already calculating how much space my things would take up in the small room at Sun Harbor. Russell seemed a little tense, avoiding being alone with me. I watched them with a new feeling, a mixture of bitterness and anticipation. Thanks to the plan I had worked out with Terrence, Field, and Darla, I felt in control for the first time in a long time. Yesterday, Terrence handed me the papers to sell the house, a set of plausible-looking papers that a notary he knew had helped draft. They won't stand up to serious scrutiny, he warned me, but they're good for a first impression. I tucked them into an old envelope and put them in the inside pocket of the jacket I had prepared for the evening. I stood up, feeling slightly nervous. Tonight was going to change everything. Tonight I would regain control of my life. There was a quiet knock on the door, and a second later, Russell came into the room. Happy birthday, Dad. He smiled and entered, holding a small package. 75 years is a serious date. Thank you, son, I tried to smile back. It was strange to hear congratulations from a man who, just a few days ago, had been discussing sending me to a nursing home. Here, this is for you. He held out the package. From me and Violet. I unwrapped it. Inside was a cardigan, dark blue with an intricate pattern. Very practical, I said, looking at the gift. It wasn't bad, but it wasn't personal either. It was the kind of cardigan you could give to any old person. Violet picked it out. Russell shrugged, as if relieved of responsibility. She said it would keep you warm. Tell her I said thank you. I folded the cardigan carefully. This house does get chilly. Russell shifted from foot to foot, clearly uncomfortable. Ah, we're having a little dinner tonight, he said at last. Nothing fancy, just a few friends and co-workers from work. I nodded, as if this was news to me. Sounds great. Then, I'll see you tonight. He headed for the door, but stopped. Dad, are you okay? You've been kind of, brooding. For a moment, I wanted to tell him everything about the conversation I'd overheard, about how much it hurt to hear Violet's words, about how I felt, but I held back. It was too late for revelations. It's all right, Russell. It's just that age makes you think about a lot of things. He nodded with relief, obviously glad the conversation hadn't turned emotional. I'll see you tonight, he repeated and walked out. I spent the day in relative solitude, which was fine with me. Violet was in the kitchen preparing hors d'oeuvres for the party. Russell had gone somewhere to get cake or other party supplies. Toward evening, I called Terrence to make sure everything was ready. Don't worry, old man, his voice sounded cheerful and confident. Field and Darla are off to a low start. As soon as you give the sign, they'll be at your door within 5 minutes. Thank you, Terry. I felt a surge of gratitude toward my old friend. I don't know what I'd do without you. It's just little things, Hugh. You'll see. It'll all work out fine. And happy birthday, by the way. I wish I could have been there in person to see their faces. I'll tell you all about it in detail, I promised. By 7 p.m., the house was filled with guests. As I'd expected, They were mostly Russell's colleagues and their wives, a few neighbors with whom Violet had kept in touch. None of my friends or former co-workers were invited. Too much fuss for them, Violet would probably explain if I asked. I put on my best suit, a dark gray one with a burgundy tie that Agnes had once given me. I went down to the living room, where voices and laughter were already resounding. A few heads turned in my direction. Someone waved, but no one approached. Violet, dressed in an elegant ivory dress, intercepted me at the foot of the stairs. "Ah, there's the birthday boy," she smiled her fake smile and adjusted my tie. "Take a seat in the chair by the fireplace, Hugh. That will be your place of honor." The place of honor was a little away from the main group of guests, but I didn't argue. It suited my plan. The evening dragged on slowly. People came up to congratulate me, but the conversations were formal and quickly dried up. "How is your health, Mr. Bramble? What do you do in retirement? What a beautiful drawing room you have." No one was interested in my answers, and I was soon left alone. Russell glanced in my direction from time to time with the look of a man performing an unpleasant duty. Violet fluttered between the guests, pouring champagne and arranging hors d'oeuvres. I sat and watched this spectacle, feeling more like a spectator than a participant in my own anniversary. Finally, when the evening was in full swing, Violet clapped her hands to attract attention. "Ladies and gentlemen, a very special moment has arrived," she announced. "Mashinawan, we will now wish our dear Hugh a happy 75th birthday." The guests gathered around, forming a semicircle. I rose from my chair, feeling my muscles tense with excitement. "Happy birthday," came from the back of the house, and Violet appeared from the dining room, holding a large cake with lit candles. Russell followed her with a bottle of champagne. "Here it is, the moment of truth," Violet sang, placing the cake on the coffee table in front of me. "A cake for our dear anniversary boy." I looked at the cake and was speechless for a moment. On the white icing in neat blue letters was written, "For the beggar himself." The guests around me froze, and then someone chuckled nervously. This chuckle was like breaking a dam. In a second, everyone was laughing. Some laughed openly, some covered their mouths with their hands, but everyone was laughing, including Russell. My son stood next to Violet and laughed at the humiliating inscription on his father's cake. "This is a joke!" Violet clapped her hands, glowing with pleasure. "Hugh is always so economical, like he's counting his last penny. He even turns off the lights when he leaves the room." Another burst of laughter. I stood looking at the cake and felt a cold rage growing inside me. It wasn't a momentary impulse. It wasn't a flash of anger. It was a crystallization of all the humiliation, all the pain, all the neglect I had endured over the past years. "Blow out the candles, Papa." Russell handed me a glass of champagne, still chuckling. I took the glass, but I didn't blow out the candles. Instead, I stood up straight and looked around at the crowd. The laughter gradually died down. "Thank you for the congratulations," I began in a steady voice, "and especially for this memorable cake." Violet smiled, clearly pleased with the effect. "I'd like to propose a toast," I continued, raising my glass, "to change. Because today is the last day you'll be living in this house." Violet's smile froze. Russell blinked, not realizing what was happening. "What are you talking about, Papa?" he asked, trying to keep his tone casual. "I'm talking about," I paused, savoring the moment, "selling this house. The new owners are giving you 10 days to move out." The silence that hung in the room was almost palpable. I saw Violet's eyes widen with shock, then narrow into suspicious slits. "Is this some kind of joke?" Her voice became harsh. "Not a very good one, I must say." "Not at all," I allowed myself a slight smile. "I have the paperwork to prove the deal." I pulled an envelope out of my jacket pocket and waved it in the air. At that moment, the doorbell rang, as if on cue. Violet and Russell exchanged confused glances. "I'll get it," I said, heading for the door. Field and Darla were standing on the threshold, he in an impeccable dark suit, she in an elegant evening gown with a string of pearls around her neck. They looked exactly the way wealthy buyers of expensive real estate should look. "Mr. Bramble," exclaimed Field, entering the house with a broad smile. "We thought we'd drop in and wish you a happy birthday. I hope we're not intruding." "Not at all," I ushered them into the living room, where the guests were frozen. "Ladies and gentlemen, I'd like you to meet Mr. and Mrs. Coleridge. This is Mr. and Mrs. Coleridge, the new owners of this house. Violet turned so pale that she was almost the same color as her dress. What do you mean, the new owners? Her voice trembled. It means, Field explained kindly, that we purchased the property from Mr. Bramble. The transaction was concluded 3 days ago. But how? When? Russell looked from me to Field and back again. Dad, you can't. You wouldn't. Why not? I shrugged. Shrenag, it's my house and I have every right to sell it. We've been looking for something in this neighborhood for a while, Darla interjected, looking around like a satisfied buyer. And when the agent showed us this house, we fell in love with it? What agent? Violet almost hissed. There was no agent here. Oh, Mr. Bramble arranged for a private showing, Field replied nonchalantly. Everything is done discreetly these days, you know. The guests began to murmur, obviously uncomfortable. Some were already making their way toward the exit. I better be going, one of Russell's co-workers muttered. Happy birthday, Mr. Bramble. Congratulations on the sale? Soon most of the guests were gone, mumbling apologies and thanks. They clearly didn't want to witness the family drama that was unfolding before their eyes. When it was just me, Russell, Violet, Field, and Darla, Violet finally exploded. This is crazy. You can't sell the house without consulting us. We live here. Temporarily, I calmly reminded her of what she'd said 5 years ago. You moved here temporarily, remember? But, she stammered, unable to find an argument. By the way, Field pulled an envelope from his inside pocket. We brought the rest of the money as agreed, Mr. Bramble. He handed me the envelope, which was visibly stuffed. I knew the inside was shredded paper, but to Russell and Violet it looked like a wad of bills. Thank you, Mr. Coleridge. I accepted the envelope with appropriate solemnity. It was very kind of you to deliver them personally. Suppletum, we always do. Darla looked around the living room with an appraising eye. Field and I believe that personal attention is necessary in important transactions. By the way, that wall between the living room and the dining room, we're thinking of tearing it down to create an open space. Violet gasped as if Darla had suggested tearing down a sacred altar. Tear it down? But it's a load-bearing wall. Oh, that's no problem for our architect, Darla said. He works wonders with space. Russell, still stunned, finally found his voice. Dad, you can't be serious, can you? You sold the house without telling us? I looked my son straight in the eye. Why would I say anything? It's not like you saw fit to discuss with me the plans to send me to Sunny Harbor. Russell turned pale, and Violet froze with her mouth open. Did you hear? Russell muttered. Every word, I nodded, including that I'm a beggarly old man who can barely make ends meet. Violet laughed nervously. Hugh, you've got it wrong. We're just worried about you. This house is too big for you alone. You said yourself you find it hard to climb the stairs. Don't bother, I held up my hand, stopping the flow of excuses. It doesn't matter anymore. The house is sold. You need to find a new place to live within 10 days. 10 days, Violet shrieked. That's impossible. We can't find anything suitable in that time. We can't be more flexible, I'm sorry, Field intervened with impeccable politeness. We've already scheduled the renovations. The workers start in 2 weeks. But what about you, Dad? Russell looked confused. Where are you going to go? Oh, we've offered Mr. Bramble a place to stay, Darla said with a friendly smile. As caretaker of the house until we spend a lot of time here, he will be given a room and full board. Room? Violet couldn't believe her ears. In his own house? Not his anymore, Field corrected gently. And yes, the east room on the second floor will remain Mr. Bramble's. I watched Russell and Violet's faces change from shock to incomprehension to panic. It was going even better than I'd expected. It's impossible, Violet shook her head, as if denial could change reality. You couldn't have sold the house. This is some kind of ridiculous joke. The paperwork says otherwise. I handed her the envelope I was still holding. You can check it out. It's all legal and official. Violet snatched the envelope and frantically began looking through the papers. Russell peered over her shoulder. Their faces grew more and more confused as they read. No, Violet shook her head. No, it doesn't have to be like this. We're going to challenge this deal. You're out of your mind, Hugh. You've been tricked. Violet, Russell shushed her, glancing worriedly at Field and Darla. "I'm sorry, Mr. and Mrs. Coleridge. This is a great surprise to us." "We understand," Darla nodded sympathetically. "Change is never easy to accept." "I suggest we all calm down," Field said judiciously. 10 days is a reasonable amount of time to find a new place to live. We might even be able to recommend some good neighborhoods." Violet looked like she was ready to lash out at him, but she held back. Instead, she turned to me, her eyes narrowed. "You're doing this to spite us," she hissed, "out of petty revenge." "I'm doing what I think is right for me," I replied calmly, "just like you planned to do when you sent me to Sun Harbor." Rasal looked completely lost. He looked from me to Violet, then to Field and Darla, clearly not knowing what to say or do. I think we'd better go," he finally said, turning to Violet. "We need to discuss this." "No!" Violet clung to his arm. "We can't just give up. This house was supposed to be ours." "Violet, please," Russell said quietly, but insistently. "Not now." She gave me a searing look, then turned to Field and Darla. "This isn't over," she said with ill-concealed fury. "We're going to contest this deal, and I advise you to check all the documents very carefully because there's something fishy going on here." With these words, she left the room at a rapid pace. Rasal paused for a moment. "Daddy," his voice sounded almost pleading, "let's talk, just you and me, tomorrow, when everyone has calmed down." I nodded, not trusting my voice. Despite my resolve, seeing him so lost was painful. When they left, Field and Darla turned to me with identical smiles. "So, how did we do?" Darla asked, taking a seat on the couch. "I think it was pretty convincing." "Great." I felt the tension of the last few hours release me. "I don't know how to thank you." "You don't have to," Field patted me on the shoulder. "It was entertaining, especially the look on your sister-in-law's face when Darla talked about tearing down the wall." I smiled involuntarily, remembering that moment. Yes, it was priceless. We talked some more, discussing the details of how to proceed. Field and Darla promised to randomly stop by in the following days to maintain the illusion of the real deal. When they left, I was alone in the living room, amidst the remnants of the failed feast. The cake with the offending inscription was still on the table. I looked at it and suddenly laughed, the first genuine laugh in a long time, full of relief and strange joy. The chess game had begun, and the first move had been made. The morning after my birthday was unusually quiet. I woke up earlier than usual, when the first rays of sunlight were just beginning to peek through the curtains. The house was ringingly silent. No footsteps in the kitchen, no dishes clinking, no muffled conversations. It was strange and unusual. I lay staring at the ceiling and thought about last night. The plan had worked even better than I'd expected. The expressions on Russell and Violet's faces when Field and Darla announced the purchase of the house had been worth every minute of preparation. Violet's face was especially striking when she realized that her dream of becoming a full-time homeowner had crumbled into dust. After Field and Darla left, I went up to my room, leaving the cake with the offending inscription untouched on the table. I heard Russell and Violet return late that night. They were arguing loudly downstairs, but I couldn't make out the words. Then the door slammed, and there was silence. Now, lying in bed, I braced myself for the inevitable confrontation. I knew they wouldn't take the situation lightly, especially Violet. She wasn't the type to give up her plans easily. Finally, I decided to go downstairs. I got dressed, choosing my clothes carefully. Not my everyday home clothes, but a strict shirt and pants, as if I were going to a business meeting. It was a psychological trick I had learned over many years of business negotiations. Clothing affects perception and self-perception. The kitchen was empty. The cake had disappeared from the living room table, and the rest of the traces of yesterday's feast had been removed. I put the kettle on and made myself some toast with jam, the simple breakfast I'd always preferred. I ate slowly, enjoying the silence and solitude I'd long been deprived of in my own home. Just as I finished my tea, I heard footsteps on the stairs. A moment later, Russell appeared in the kitchen. He looked exhausted, as if he'd been up all night. His hair was disheveled, dark circles under his eyes, and his clothes were wrinkled, as if he'd slept in them. "Good morning," I said calmly. Russell stared at me, as if seeing me for the first time. "Why, Papa?" His voice was hoarse. "Why did you do it?" I set the cup aside and straightened up. "Samo, why do you think? I answered a question with a question. If it's because of that conversation you overheard, he started. Overheard? I raised an eyebrow. I was sitting on the veranda while you and Violet were discussing how to get me to Sunny Harbor so you could take over the house. You didn't even bother to close the window. Russell lowered his head. It's not what you think it is. We've been taking care of you. It's hard for you to be alone in a house this big. Don't go on, I held up my hand, stopping the stream of excuses. I heard everything, every word. I'd heard everything, every word. I'd heard about being a beggarly old man, about my plans to take out a loan against the house to pay for my children's education and everything else. Russell was silent, obviously unable to find the words. At that moment, Violet appeared in the kitchen. Unlike her husband, she looked collected and determined, though her eyes were red with tears or sleeplessness. So, she said without preamble, you've decided to get back at us by selling the house out from under us. Very mature, Hugh. I looked at her calmly. No more mature than planning to send a man to a nursing home to take possession of his property, Violet. We meant well, she raised her voice. You can see you're not managing the house, and at Sunny Harbor, you'd have professionals taking care of you. And the fact that I didn't want to go to Sunny Harbor didn't bother you? I remained calm, which only seemed to increase her irritation. You're selfish, she blurted out. You think only of yourself. What about Russell? What about your grandchildren? Did you think of them when you sold the house to some strangers? Were you thinking of me when you planned my future without even consulting me? I countered. And speaking of grandchildren, when was the last time they came to visit their grandfather? A year ago? 2? Or were they just interested in the house too? Violet opened her mouth to answer, but Russell intervened. Enough! Both of you. He looked on the verge of a breakdown. Papa, please, let's talk reasonably. Can't this deal be undone? Explain to Mr. and Mrs. Coleridge that there's been a mistake? I shook my head. I'm afraid not. The papers have been signed. The money has been transferred. The house is no longer mine. But where do we go? Russell spread his hands in despair. We only have 10 days. We can't find a suitable place to live in that time. You could look for an apartment, I suggested, or a smaller house. After all, you both work. You have a steady income. I don't work, Violet exclaimed. I'm working on the house. My house, I clarified, which now belongs to the Coleridges. Violet was literally shaking with rage. You, she gasped with anger. You can't do this to us. We're your family. Family, I smiled sadly. Family doesn't humiliate each other, doesn't laugh at the "for the most pauper" sign on the cake, doesn't plan to get rid of their elders to take over their possessions. Violet suddenly burst into tears. These were not quiet, restrained tears. She sobbed loudly, hysterically, audibly. I've done so much for this house. For you. And you. You ruined it. Where are we going to live now? How are we going to move everything in 10 days? Russell hugged his wife, trying to comfort her, but she pushed him away. This is all your fault, she shouted at him. Shuriken, you should have deeded the house to us a long time ago. But no, you kept dragging it out, afraid of hurting Daddy. And now we're on the street. Violet, please. Russell looked completely confused. We'll figure something out. What? What are we going to do? She was smearing tears all over her face. You heard your father. He's already made up his mind. He betrayed us. He betrayed his own family. I watched the scene in silence. Part of me felt satisfied that the plan had worked. But the other part of me, the part that was still the father, was pained to see my son suffer. I reminded myself, however, that it was his betrayal that had led to this situation. I didn't betray my family, I said quietly. I simply disposed of my property. It was my house, and I had every right to sell it. Was your house, Violet corrected venomously through her tears. Xian, now you're a tenant like us. Only you were allowed to stay out of pity. Maybe, I shrugged, but at least I wouldn't have to find a new place to live in 10 days. That remark brought tears to Violet's eyes again. Russell gave me a reproachful look. Papa, please, can't you talk to those Coleridges? Explain the situation to them? Maybe they'll agree to give us more time. I thought for a moment. pretending to consider the possibility. I don't think it would make any difference, I finally said. They were very specific about the time frame. They already have the renovations scheduled. But maybe if you ask, Rasal began. There's no use asking, Violet interrupted him. Don't you see? He's planned this whole thing. He chose buyers who would throw us out as quickly as possible. There was some truth in what she said, and I didn't say anything. Well, Violet straightened suddenly, wiping away her tears. Then there's no point in wasting time talking. We must act. Rasal, we'll start looking for a new place right away. She turned and walked briskly out of the kitchen. A moment later, the sound of drawers and cabinets being pulled out came from upstairs as she began to pack. Rasal and I were alone. He was looking at me with an expression I couldn't quite decipher, a mixture of hurt, anger, confusion, and perhaps a belated realization. I never thought you were capable of such a thing, he said at last, kicking your own son out of the house. I never thought my son was capable of discussing how to put me in a nursing home so he could take my property, I replied. Life is full of surprises, isn't it? Russell sighed and lowered his head. It was Violet's idea, he said quietly. I never meant to send you anywhere. It's just, she's so persistent. And you just went with the flow, I finished for him. All my life, Russell. First your mother made your decisions for you, then Violet. Have you ever wondered what you want for yourself? He looked up at me with a look of sudden anger. Don't lecture me, not now that you've thrown us out on the street. I didn't throw anyone out on the street. I remained calm. You have 10 days to find a new place to live. That's a reasonable amount of time. 10 days, he splashed his hands. Do you have any idea how hard it is to find a place to live in 10 days? Especially something suitable, in a good neighborhood? I do, I nodded, chucking him. But that's not my problem, Russell. You're adults. You can handle it. He looked at me as if he were seeing me for the first time. I don't recognize you, he whispered. Where did my father go? He's here, I pointed to myself. He's just stopped being the doormat everyone wipes their feet on. Violet shouted loudly from upstairs. Rasal, come here at once. We must decide what we take with us and what we leave behind. He flinched at the sound of her voice and hurried upstairs with one last incomprehensible glance at me. I was left alone in the kitchen, listening to the sounds of frantic packing upstairs. It was strange to realize that my plan had worked even better than I'd expected. Violet hadn't even bothered to check the sale papers. Her anger and panic had completely clouded her judgment. And Rasal, as usual, just went with the flow, not trying to take control of the situation. The day passed in a strange atmosphere. Violet paced around the house, packing her things and at the same time talking on the phone with realtors and friends, trying to find a temporary place to live. Rasal tried to talk to me several times, but each time Violet interrupted him, asking for help or advice. By evening, there were several suitcases and boxes in the hallway, the first shipment of things they planned to move out in the next few days. Violet announced that she had found a possible option, an apartment that her friend was renting out, but they had to hurry as there were other applicants. We'll go to see it tomorrow, she said to Rasal, as if it had been decided long ago. Then we'll go to the agency and look at a few other options. But I have an important meeting tomorrow, Rasal objected uncertainly. I can't cancel it. That's fine. Violet splashed her hands together. That's wonderful. We're being thrown out of the house and you're worried about a meeting. What's more important, Russell? Your job or a roof over your head? Their argument was interrupted by the doorbell. I went to open it, already guessing who it might be. Field and Darla stood on the doorstep, both looking businesslike. Field held a clipboard and Darla a tape measure. Good evening, Mr. Bramble, Field greeted cheerfully. We hope we're not interrupting. We'd like to take some measurements for the renovation planning. Of course, come in. I stepped aside to let them in. Russell and Violet froze in the hallway, looking at the new owners with a mixture of fear and hostility. Good evening, Field nodded to them. I apologize for the intrusion. We won't be long, just need to finalize some details for the architect. We were just discussing when we're moving out, Violet said with a strained smile. We've already found a few options. Wonderful, Darla smiled back with the same fake politeness. We really appreciate your understanding. Renovations are such a hassle. We'd like to get started as soon as possible. She took out a tape measure and began to measure the width of the hallway, pretending to record the results in her notebook. "May I ask what exactly you plan to do here?" Russell asked, trying to sound friendly. "Oh, a complete remodeling," Field replied enthusiastically. "We want to combine the living room and dining room, like Darla said. Maybe knock down a few walls upstairs to make the master bedroom bigger. And of course, we'll completely remodel the kitchen." Violet went pale when she heard the plans to radically remodel the house she already considered her own. "But it's a historic house," she said with a squeak. "It's almost 100 years old." "That's why it needs modernization," Darla smiled. "We'll keep the facade, of course. It has a certain charm." They went into the living room, still pretending to measure and record. Russell and Violet followed them as if they were tethered, a look of horror on their faces. "And this furniture, do you keep it?" Field asked, pointing to an antique sideboard that had belonged to Agnes's parents. "Yes," Violet answered hastily. "We'll take our personal belongings, of course, but the furniture stays." "Good," Field made a note on his clipboard. "Then we'll have to order a container to move it all out. We prefer modern minimalism." I saw Violet clench her fists. That sideboard was one of the few things she really cared about, polishing it regularly and arranging family photos on it. "But it's an antique," she said stiffly. "It's over 100 years old." "That's the problem," Darla shrugged. "It doesn't fit into our design concept. But don't worry, we'll find a good use for it. Maybe auction it off or donate it to a museum." I could see Violet fighting the urge to say something harsh. Russell put his hand on her shoulder, as if trying to reassure her. Field and Darla continued their rounds, commenting on everything they saw and pretending to plan drastic changes. They talked about tearing down walls, replacing windows, rebuilding the staircase. Everything they knew was dear to Violet, who prided herself on her taste and how she had improved the house in 5 years. Finally, having completed their rounds, they returned to the hallway. "Well, we've gotten all the information we need," Field announced. "Thank you so much for letting us look around." "You're welcome," I smiled. "This is your home now." Violet made a sound that sounded like a stifled sob. "I hope you find a new place quickly," Darla said kindly to Russell and Violet. "Moving is so stressful, especially when you have to hurry." "We're almost there." Violet tried to keep her dignity. "We're going to see the apartment tomorrow. It's even nicer than this old house, modern, with a smart home system and underground parking." "Sounds delightful," Darla smiled in disbelief. "Good luck to you." After they left, Violet burst into tears again. It was no longer the hysterical sobs of the morning, but quiet tears of defeat. "They will destroy everything," she sobbed. "The whole house, all the memories." Russell put his arm around her, looking at me helplessly over her shoulder. I could see the mute question in his gaze. "Are you really going to let this happen?" But I just shook my head and walked away, leaving them alone with their grief. It may have been cruel, but they deserved this lesson. Both of them. I lay awake for a long time that night, listening to the sounds of the house. The muffled voices of Russell and Violet came from downstairs, still arguing about what to do next. Occasionally, Violet's voice would break into a shout, then quiet again. Around midnight, the front door slammed, one of them coming out, probably to cool off after the argument. Lying in the dark, I thought about what was going on. The plan was working perfectly. Violet and Russell were in a panic, fully believing in the reality of selling the house. But there was no satisfaction I felt. Only the heaviness of breaking a family bond that may have been illusory all along. 5 days had passed since my anniversary. 5 days of unrelenting chaos, nervous phone calls, slamming doors, intense silences over rare breakfasts together. Russell and Violet had become nervous shadows of themselves, both gaunt, with circles under their eyes, whispering constantly when they thought I couldn't hear. Violet had developed a flurry of activity in finding a new place to live. Every day she left early in the morning and returned late at night, having looked at, in her words, dozens of options, all terrible. Russell, on the other hand, spent most of his time at home, taking time off work to deal with the situation. I suspected that he was actually embarrassed to look his coworkers in the eye after suddenly losing the house he had talked so much about. On the morning of the 5th day after the listing, I sat in my office, a small room on the first floor that Violet had once wanted to turn into a walk-in closet, but I'd fought it off. It was the only place in the house where I still felt like myself, with bookshelves to the ceiling, an old desk, and a chair that remembered my father. I looked through old photo albums, something I hadn't touched in years. Here was Agnes, young and laughing, holding the newborn Russell. Here are the three of us on the beach, Russell, about 5 years old, proudly showing off a crab he caught. Here is his graduation, Agnes and I on either side of my son, all three of us happy and full of hope for the future. What happened to the boy in the pictures? When did he turn into a man who could laugh at his own father's humiliation? A knock on the door snapped me out of my musings. "Come in," I said, closing the album. Russell appeared at the door. He looked hesitant, as if he wasn't sure he had the right to come in. "Can I talk to you, Papa?" he asked quietly. I nodded and pointed to the small chair across the hall. Russell sat down, rubbing his hands together nervously. "Violet isn't home," he said, as if that explained his visit. "She went to sign the lease on the apartment. We found a place in Oak Park. Not that we like it, but we don't have much choice." "I see." I looked at my son carefully. "What did you want to talk about?" Russell took a deep breath, as if gathering his thoughts. "I want to understand why, Dad," he said at last. "Why did you decide to sell the house now? And why this way? Without warning, on your birthday, in front of all the guests." I stared at him in silence, wondering where to begin. "You really don't understand?" I finally asked. "After all these years? I know that Violet and I haven't always been attentive." He looked away. "But selling the house, putting us out on the street, that's a little harsh, don't you think?" "Harsh?" I felt the bitterness rising inside me. "Russell, let's talk about what tough means. Tough is when you're slowly being forced out of your own home. It's having your stuff taken to the garage without asking, being spoken to like a retarded child. When you hear your daughter-in-law call you a beggarly old man, and your son remains silent without objecting." Russell wrinkled his nose but didn't interrupt. 5 years, Russell," I continued. 5 years I endured this humiliation in my own home. After your mother died, I was crushed by grief. You came, supposedly to help, and I was grateful. And then you just stayed. And every day I felt more and more unwanted, in the house that Agnes and I built with our own hands. "We didn't want you to feel unwanted," Russell muttered. "We just fit into our own rhythm of life." "Fit in?" I grinned bitterly. Violet had rearranged all the furniture, threw out half the things that reminded her of your mother. Said I needed to move on. He was silent, staring at the floor. "Do you remember the last time you asked my opinion on something?" I continued. "About any decision regarding the house?" "No. I don't remember either, because there was no such thing. You were just doing things your way, and I was confronted with the facts. We thought it was for the best." His voice sounded uncertain. "Less worry for you." "Better?" I shook my head. "Better for who, Russell? For me or for you? When Violet forbade me to use the coffee maker because I might break it, was that for my own good? Or when she put away my magazines, which I'd collected all my life, in the garage, was that for my benefit too?" Russell looked up at me. There was confusion in his eyes. "I hadn't noticed," he began. "I mean, I saw some things, but I thought they were small things." "Little things?" I shook my head. "The little things add up to a whole picture, Russell. A picture of how I was slowly stripped of my dignity, my autonomy, my respect. In my own home." He was silent, digesting my words. "And then there was that conversation," I continued, "about Sun Harbor, about how you were planning to delicately suggest that I move into a nursing home so that the house would pass completely to you." "It wasn't my idea," Russell said quickly. "Violet suggested it, and I just didn't object," I finished for him. "As always, Russell, you never object. Not when your wife humiliates your father, not when she plans to send him to a nursing home. You just go with the flow and say, 'Yes, dear.'" He flinched at my words as if I'd slapped him. "That's not fair, Dad," he muttered. "It's not fair?" I stepped forward. "You know what's really unfair, Russell? When your only son laughs at the inscription, 'For the most pauper,' on your 75th birthday cake. That's what's not fair." He lowered his head, and I saw his shoulders begin to shake. Was he really crying? I didn't think, his voice broke. It seemed like a harmless joke. Violet said you'd appreciate the humor. Appreciate the humor? I felt the bitterness rising to my throat. At being called a beggar in front of all the guests? That my own son laughed at the humiliation? I'm sorry, he said. Yeah, I didn't realize what it looked like from your side. Secondary. Exactly, I leaned back in my chair. You didn't understand, or didn't want to understand. All those years you saw only what you wanted to see, a happy family, with an old father living out his days under your careful tutelage. The reality was very different. We sat in silence. I could see Russell struggling with the realization of his part in all this. Finally, he looked up at me. His eyes were red. But why is it like this, Papa? He asked quietly. Why couldn't you just talk to me? Tell me you felt bad, that you didn't like the way things had turned out? I sighed. Do you really think that would have helped? Russell, I've tried, many times. But you always waved it off. Dad, you're exaggerating. Dad, Violet just wants what's best. Dad, you need to be more flexible. Can you remember a single time you took my side against Violet? He was silent, and that was more eloquent than any words. Exactly, I nodded. Not once. Not once in 5 years. I didn't want there to be strife in the family, he muttered. I thought that if everyone compromised, but compromise is when both sides give in, I interrupted. Not when one person always gives in and the others always get what they want. Russell sat with his head down, as if under the weight of a sudden realization. And after all this, I continued, after all the humiliation, after the overheard conversation about the nursing home, after the cake with the insulting inscription, you wonder why I decided to sell the house? I understand your resentment, he finally said. But couldn't you have found another way? Something less radical? I shook my head. Sometimes it takes a drastic step to make a difference, Russell. I tried talking, I tried hinting, I tried accepting the situation. Nothing worked, and now we have a fresh start, all three of us. A new beginning, he chuckled bitterly, in a rented apartment in Oak Park. At least it'll be yours, I said. I wouldn't have to live under the same roof as a penniless old man. He flinched at my words. Don't say that, Dad, he said quietly. I never thought of you in those terms. But I didn't mind when Violet spoke either, I pointed out. He lowered his head again. We sat in silence for a while. I felt a strange mixture of emotions, relief at having finally spoken, bitterness at all these years of humiliation, and hope that maybe this situation would make Russell see things differently. Our silence was interrupted by the sound of the front door opening. Russell, came Violet's voice. Are you home? I have great news. Russell stood up, giving me one last look, a mixture of regret, remorse, and a new resolve. I have to go, he said quietly. But this conversation, it's made a lot of things clear. It's made me think. I hope so, I replied. He left the office and I stayed sitting, staring at the closed door. For the first time in a long time, I felt like my son and I were having a real, honest conversation. Maybe all was not yet lost. Violet's excited voice came from the hallway. I signed the contract. We can move in the day after tomorrow. It's not perfect, of course, but it'll do for a while, and then we'll look for something better. The most important thing is that we can get our things and get out of here as soon as possible. That's wonderful, Russell's voice sounded uncertain, but maybe we should reconsider. The 10 days aren't over yet, and I was just talking to my father. About what? Violet's voice became suspicious. What did you talk to him about? About how we've been living these past 5 years, Russell answered. I noticed a new note in his voice, a hardness that hadn't been there before. About why he decided to sell the house. And did it make you feel better? Violet let out a sarcastic chuckle. Did he tell you how bad we were and how poor and miserable he was? Violet, Russell's voice grew even firmer. That's enough. I've heard his point of view. And you know what? He's right about a lot of things. We really haven't treated him very well over the years. What? Violet almost shrieked. Don't be silly. We took care of him. Who cooked his meals? Who washed his clothes? Who made sure he took his medication? And at the same time, we pushed him to the margins of life, Russell said quietly. We took away his control over his own life, his own home. We treated him like a child, not like a respected man who had spent his life taking care of us. I can't believe you're saying this. Violet's voice was breaking into a scream. After everything he's done, threw us out on the street, humiliated us in front of our friends and co-workers, and the inscription on the cake? Russell's voice sounded surprisingly calm. For the beggar himself, it wasn't a humiliation. It was a joke, Violet snorted. Everyone was laughing. Exactly. Everyone laughed at my father on his 75th birthday, including me. And you know what? I'm ashamed of it. I held my breath as I listened to this conversation. Was Russell really beginning to understand? You're insufferable, Violet shouted. Instead of thinking about our future, about how we're going to recover from this blow, you're sitting there beating yourself up over some stupid joke. It's not about the joke, Violet. Russell's voice was tired but firm. It's about the way we've treated him all these years. And I'm beginning to understand why he did what he did and not what he did. Oh, so you're on his side now? Violet's voice was tingling with rage. After everything we've been through? After everything I've done to get us a new place as soon as possible? I'm not taking sides, Russell said. I'm just trying to understand the situation from all sides. While you're understanding the situation, I'm doing the real thing. Violet cut him off. I'm going to go pack. We're leaving the day after tomorrow, whether you like it or not. I heard her rushing up the stairs. A few seconds later, the door slammed at the top of the stairs. Russell stood in the hallway for a while. I could hear his heavy breathing. Then slow footsteps came up the stairs. I leaned back in my chair, trying to make sense of what had happened. It seemed my plan had had unexpected consequences. I had wanted to teach both Russell and Violet a lesson, but it seemed that only my son had been able to learn something valuable from it. As for Violet, I was beginning to realize that her attitude toward me was only a symptom of deeper problems. For the rest of the day, the atmosphere in the house was tense. There was the sound of the furniture being moved, the slamming of cupboard doors, the occasional raised voice of Russell and Violet arguing, though I couldn't make out the words. I remained in my study, determined not to interfere with their quarrel. In the evening, when I was in the kitchen preparing a simple supper, Violet came in. She looked haggard but determined. We're leaving the day after tomorrow, she said without preamble. We'll take most of our things with us and we'll come back for the rest later. Okay, I nodded, continuing to chop vegetables for the salad. You're happy, aren't you? I could hear the fury in her voice. You got what you wanted, destroyed our family. I put the knife down and turned to her. I didn't destroy the family, Violet. I just didn't let myself be destroyed anymore. What melodramatic nonsense! She splashed her hands. Destroying yourself! We cared for you. We did everything we could to make you comfortable. You did what you thought was right without asking my opinion, I replied calmly. That's not caring, Violet. It's control. Oh, so now we were controlling you? She let out a sarcastic chuckle. Maybe we've been oppressing you too. Call it what you want, I shrugged. But the fact remained that I had no voice or choice in my own home. It was our home too, she raised her voice. We lived here for 5 years. We put so much effort into making it cozy. Cozy for who, Violet? I looked her straight in the eye. Was it for me or for yourself? She didn't answer, only snorted angrily. Either way, it's over, she said finally. You've had your way. We're leaving. And you know what? I'm glad. At least now we can live like normal people, without you always complaining and complaining. I've never complained, Violet, I said quietly. I've always tried to be tolerant and understanding. Maybe that was my mistake. Oh, are we going to play the victim now? She crossed her arms across her chest. Poor Hugh, who's been abused by everyone. You know what? It's all your own fault. If you hadn't been so stubborn, if you hadn't clung to the past and old habits, things might have been different. Maybe I went back to chopping vegetables. We'll never know. Is that all you have to say? She looked at me with a puzzled expression. After everything that's happened? What do you want to hear, Violet? I sighed tiredly. Apologies? Regrets? I don't regret my decision. It was necessary for all of us. You, she was choking with anger. You're impossible. And you know what? Russell is the same way. Instead of fighting for our interests, he sits around philosophizing about different points of view. Meanwhile, the house has sailed right out of our hands. At that moment, Russell appeared in the kitchen. He looked tired but calm. Violet, he said quietly, that's enough. This doesn't solve the problem. The problem is, she turned to him sharply, that you failed to protect our interests. You failed to stand up to your father, and the result is that we're losing the house that should have been ours. This house was never ours, Russell replied calmly. It never should have been. We were guests here, Violet. Guests who had forgotten their place. Her face contorted with rage. I can't believe I'm hearing you say this. After all the years I've spent on this house, on your ungrateful family. Violet, Russell began, but she interrupted him. No, I don't want to hear any more of this. I'm leaving. I'm staying with Sheila. And you. You can stay here with your precious daddy now that you're on his side. She ran out of the kitchen. A moment later, the front door slammed. Russell sighed and sank into a chair. Oh, I'm sorry about the scene, he said quietly. Don't apologize, I shook my head. It wasn't your fault. She doesn't understand, he rubbed his temples. She only sees her truth. We each see our own truth, Russell. I finished the salad and sat down across from him. The question is whether we're ready to see the truth of others. He nodded, staring off into space. I've learned a lot these days, Dad, he said at last. About myself. About us. About how it all went wrong. And I'm sorry. Really sorry. I could see the sincerity in his eyes, and I felt something warm in my chest. Not forgiveness, not yet, but maybe the beginning of a path toward it. I'm sorry too, Russell, I said quietly. I'm sorry it's come to this. We sat in silence, each of us absorbed in our own thoughts. I thought about how, for the first time in a long time, I felt heard and understood by my own son. And while the pain of betrayal hadn't completely disappeared, something had begun to change. The rift in the family that I had provoked with my plan to sell the house was deeper than I had anticipated. But maybe sometimes you have to tear something down to build it back up again, something more honest, more real. Snow was falling in large flakes, turning my garden into a winter fairy tale. I stood at the living room window, watching the white blanket hide the outlines of the paths. December brought not only cold weather, but also a strange peacefulness. It had been a month since Russell and Violet had moved to Oak Park, and the house was all mine again. The change was not only in housing status, but also in my sense of self. I felt like the master of my own life again. I returned the magazines from the garage to the bottom shelf in the living room. I put Agnes's photos back where they belonged. I used the coffee maker again, without anyone's permission, and made the coffee as strong as I liked. Field and Darla stopped by regularly to visit, usually once a week, maintaining the legend of selling the house for neighbors. They would arrive in an expensive car, loudly discussing non-existent remodeling plans. The neighbors believed the story and now asked how I was doing as caretaker. After Russell and Violet left, I reconnected with old friends. Terrence and I began weekly games of chess again. I revisited the library and the jazz club, small joys that had disappeared from my life over the past 5 years. Russell and I rarely spoke to each other. He called a couple times, and the conversations were tense. Violet didn't call at all. On that December day, the doorbell rang as I was preparing dinner. Russell stood on the doorstep, his cheeks and nose red from the cold, his hair dusted with snow. He looked gaunt, with shadows under his eyes. "Hello, Papa," he said. "May I come in?" I let him in. Russell came in, shaking off the snow. His gaze glanced around the living room, noting the changes, the furniture back in its place, the pictures of Agnes on the walls. "You've put everything back the way it was," he remarked. "Not exactly," I answered. "But what was important? Yes." We went into the kitchen. I offered him coffee and he accepted. "How are you, Dad? Doing okay on your own?" I grinned. Better than most people thought. "I came to tell you something," he said after a pause. "Violet left me." "When did that happen?" "A week ago. She packed up and went to her sister's in Chicago. said she didn't sign up for a life in the doghouse with a man who couldn't stand up for his family? I'm sorry, I said, and it was true. I'm not sure I'm sorry, Rasal replied abruptly. The last month has been a revelation. I saw how Violet had manipulated me all these years, how I'd let her make decisions for both of us. The doorbell rang, interrupting our conversation. Terrence stood on the threshold with Field and Darla visible behind him. I hope we're not early, Terrence asked. The weather is so lovely, we decided to get here early. When we entered the kitchen, Russell was already standing, preparing to greet our guests. His gaze flickered to the newcomers, and he frowned as if trying to remember where he had seen them. Russell, this is my old friend Terrence Coleridge, I began, and this is his son, Field, and daughter-in-law, Darla. At the mention of the Coleridge name, Russell's eyes widened. He shifted his gaze from the guest to me. I could see the realization happening in his head. Coleridge? How? Those people who bought our house? Terrence laughed. Oh, that little hoax. Hugh, you still haven't told him? Told him what? Russell asked. The house never sold, I said. It was all an act. Field and Darla played the buyers, and Terrence helped with the paperwork. Russell sat there like he'd been struck by thunder. This whole month, this whole sale thing. Was it a hoax? Not a prank, I corrected him. A way of getting across to you what you refuse to hear otherwise. Hugh and I have been friends for 50 years, Terrence interjected. When he told me what was going on in that house, I couldn't stay away. It was fascinating, Darla smiled. Like a little play. Your wife's reaction to the idea of tearing down the wall between the living room and dining room was priceless. Russell lowered his head. His shoulders began to shake. But when he lifted his face, there was a strange smile on it. A mixture of relief, bitterness, and understanding. So we lost the apartment, moved in, because of a prank? Because of a lesson, I corrected him, which seemed timely. Violet's gonna freak when she finds out. She won't if you don't tell her. We spent the next hour telling Russell about our plan, from the overheard conversation about the nursing home to the details of the staging. As the story unfolded, his expression changed. Shock gave way to understanding and then to humility. I don't know what to say, he finally said. Part of me wants to be angry for this manipulation, but another part of me understands why you did it, and that maybe it was necessary. I'm not proud that I had to resort to that method, I admitted, but nothing else worked. What now? Russell asked. Do you want me to go back? We could try it all over again, without Violet. I shook my head. No, we both need space, time to process things, to rebuild ourselves and our boundaries. I understand. I need to learn to live on my own, to be myself, not a reflection of other people's expectations. That doesn't mean we can't communicate, I added, just on a healthy basis, with respect for boundaries. Real relationships are built on respect, Russell said quietly, not on property, not on dependency. It's about mutual respect and recognizing each other's value. I was surprised to hear him say that. Maybe the lesson had indeed been learned. Russell left shortly afterward, promising to call at Christmas. Terrence, Field, Darla, and I stayed behind to celebrate an impromptu dinner. The house was filled with the aromas of food cooking, the sounds of music and casual conversation. As we sat down at the table in the living room near the fireplace, I felt a strange calmness. It was as if the house had breathed a full sigh of relief from the weight of strained relationships. I propose a toast, Terrence said, raising his glass, to new beginnings, to friendships that stand the test of time, and to Hugh, the most inventive 75-year-old vigilante I know. We laughed and raised our glasses. I felt a warmth spread through my body, not only from the wine, but also from the realization that I was once again surrounded by people who could see the real me. The snow continued to fall outside the window, covering the world with a white blanket, as if offering a blank slate for a new chapter of life. And I was ready to begin it, not as a beggarly old man, but as a man who had regained his dignity and choice. Merry Christmas, Terrence said, and may the new year bring only joy and peace. I looked at my friends, at the fire in the fireplace, at the snow outside the window, and thought that real wealth is not measured in houses or money. It's measured by the freedom to be yourself and the ability to surround yourself with people who respect that freedom. And by that measure, I was one of the wealthiest people in Southfield.